Hello, everyone. Good evening. We'll just make a start, I think. So firstly, thank you so much for attending. And secondly, I'm just going to really quickly spend probably 20 minutes talking through a few tips and tricks to support your child who's in year 13. Firstly, a heads up that this meeting is being recorded. The reason for that is that I can send it out to anybody who cannot attend this event, but it does mean that if you ask any questions, that will be recorded. So any questions, feel free to pop in the chat, but if you don't feel comfortable asking a question in the chat because of the fact it's being recorded, then just ping me an email afterwards. Right then, so if anyone who doesn't know who I am, my name is Susie Green. I have the absolute privilege of being the head of sixth form, and I've been trying to do more of these evening chats after feedback last year. I did them at 4 o'clock last year, and there were feedback that they were quite difficult to get to, so I've been trying to do them at 7 o'clock, so hopefully that's useful for you. Right then, so the things I'm going to talk about, firstly, we'll talk a little bit about the purpose of the event, then we'll talk about student wellbeing, study tips, procrastination, and finally, mobile phones. So the reason that I am hosting this event, I've had feedback from a few parents in year 13 who have explained to me that they just don't know what to be doing to support their child. They want to support their child, they want to be the best parent they can be, and they don't know how to support their child specifically through year 13. Particularly, I've had parents, and I'm sure everyone can empathise with this, I've had parents comment that it's difficult to balance allowing students of this particular age to be adults and not to be adults in the right proportion. So it's a particularly difficult age because the students, half of year 13 are 18 now, they literally are adults. And often they think that they know everything and they need no support when actually that's just not the case. And so part of this is to talk about that balance. I'll discuss wellbeing strategies and I'll talk about ideas for revision strategies to adopt at home. Full disclosure, I don't have a teenage child, so I can't directly empathise with what you are going through as parents of year 13s, but I work with parents of year 13s every single year, so I do have a good understanding of the pressures that you are under. So that's the purpose of the event, and I really, really hope it's helpful. So before we start, this is really, really important. If you believe your child is entitled to access arrangements or they would benefit from access arrangements and they do not get them, please tell us as soon as possible. So if you don't know what that means, access arrangements are things that we can put in place during examinations so that a child maybe has some small tweaks and they do their exams in slightly different circumstances to their peers. To help them, for example, if they have got special educational needs or if they have SEMH needs, they have anxiety, something like that. So a small number of things that we can offer are extra time. So in other words, if students have certain additional needs, they can have longer to do their exams than other students. They can have a smaller venue. So this is very much at our discretion. If your child has high anxiety, finds sitting in the exam hall intimidating, we can arrange for them to be in a smaller room. We have a small room in T block where we can guarantee that your child will have the same seat for all of their exams. Some of the children really find that beneficial because it means that they get really used to where the clock is, they get used to what the light looks like at different times of day, things like that. Some children are entitled to have a reader. What that means is the questions are actually read out to them rather than them having to read them themselves. Some children are entitled to a scribe where somebody will actually sit and write their exams for them. Some are entitled to working on a laptop, and there are various other arrangements. But basically, if your child does not have any of these arrangements and you think either they are entitled to them because they have any additional needs or that they would benefit from them, then let us know. If you think your child would benefit from them, I can't promise you because a lot of it depends on, so we can't just give anyone access arrangements. We have to assess them and assess them for need and work with the exam boards to do that. But it is really important we find out sooner rather than later, because if we find out later, then we do get to a point it's too late. So please, please communicate with us about that. Right then, the first thing I'm going to talk about is well-being. So in my experience of children in year 13, your child is probably either fairly laid back to the point it irritates you or deeply anxious and run themselves into the ground. There are students in the middle, they do exist, but most Finnan Park students tend to fit into one category or the other. And I sympathise with that, and the approach that's needed with those two categories of child is very, very different. I say to the students all the way along, and they often don't believe me, and then they get to the summer term and suddenly they realise that I was right. However much we want to focus on well-being, and well-being is and will always be the most important thing, the best thing we can all do, and that is staff, that's parents, that is students themselves, the best thing we can all do to help students with their well-being is to ensure they study early enough so they don't need to panic at the end. Because in reality, if they leave everything to the last minute, there just isn't much we can do to help. Now we'll try, we'll look after them, we'll make them a cup of tea, we'll give them chocolate, we will all band together to support them. But at the end of the day, A-levels are big, there is a lot to learn and there is a lot of studying to do. And if they don't do it until it's too late, there isn't a great deal we can do to improve their well-being or indeed their outcomes. So the biggest message of today really is that it is very, very important that students get on with it, as it were. The good thing about this meeting being now is it is not too late. It might be too late for the mock exams, but it absolutely is not too late for the summer. And any child, regardless of how hard they're working, will be able to pull it back. So here are some academic wellbeing tools. I'll talk about pastoral wellbeing in a minute. But in terms of academic wellbeing, it's really, really important that we look after the academic wellbeing of the children. So firstly, please support them to, I've just seen the question in the chat. I will come to that in just one second. Firstly, I do encourage making sure that all the students have a revision schedule, but it's important that that revision schedule has some flexibility. What we often find with students is that they make a schedule, it's going fine, and on day 2 they get behind and then the schedule's just done, and then they panic and then they fall apart and they don't use the schedule anymore. So it's really important if they make a revision schedule, and I do recommend they do, and I recommend that you sit with them and support them to make one, that they build in enough flexibility that if they miss one thing, then there is some sort of catch-up time. Now, popping to the question in the chat, in terms of early enough, I would be saying students need to have a focus on the summer exams from now. That doesn't mean they need to be revising for 100 hours a day, as some of them think they do from this point, but they should be getting in the habit of doing some revision almost every day from now on. There will clearly be times when they don't. It's important they have a few days off over Christmas. It's important that they have a day off when it's their birthday, whenever that might be, of course, unless unfortunately their birthday falls right in the middle of the exam period. There will be family weddings, there'll be events, but I would say other than those events, it's important that they start getting on with it now. If they do a little bit every day from now, it'll save them having to do the huge cramming sessions that are so unhealthy for them later on. Too late isn't now. It's absolutely not too late, but it will get to be too late. I generally say to students, by March or April, if they don't have a good revision schedule going, then it is too late. Obviously, we will support them regardless. But in terms of timing, the sooner they can get on with it, the better. I would say, hopefully they're already revising for their mock exams. They shouldn't really stop. Right then, anyway, so back to the slide. It's really important that students have a quiet space to work and some space to work. And now in terms of what we can do to help with that, I'm very aware that some of you have living arrangements that mean either there are young children, there might be elderly relatives, you might live in a big block of flats that's really noisy. Whatever your circumstances are, there might even just be really annoying roadworks outside your house. We get it. Firstly, students can stay on site until 6 o'clock. They can get to us anytime from about 7 a.m. And so if they're struggling to study, they can come to the study centre during any of those times, and it's virtually silent before school and it's virtually silent after school. However, they can also get a pass, which we will give them, for Warwick and Coventry University Library, and they can go and study there if they feel that they need somewhere quiet to study over evenings and weekends. However, please do check on them. Partly this is a wellbeing tool to make sure they're okay, but also we all know what the kids are like, and we all know that there are times when they've told us they've been studying for 3 hours and actually they haven't. So I really would recommend checking on them every so often to make sure they're actually studying how they say they are. Question in the chat, yes they can. We have an academic mentor who will happily review schedules and who will also Yes, absolutely. So if your child gets their revision schedule together, ask her to book some academic mentoring appointments, and our academic mentor will review those for her. Her mentor will too. So it's really important that students plan realistic breaks, but I would say more important that they plan when to do work. Every single one of us has done that thing where we have a holiday or a break. We know we've got some work to do. We don't do it, but we worry about it every single day. And that means that we never actually rest because it's in the back of our mind at all times. We don't relax, we don't switch off, but we don't do the work. I do that. I'm sure you do that. The students definitely do that. So probably the biggest thing you can do to support them is facilitate them knowing when they're going to do their work so that when they actually are having a rest, they're resting and it's not ticking away at the back of their mind in the same way. Please do ensure they're eating healthy food and keeping hydrated. The fact they tell you they've had plenty of water does not mean they have. The fact they tell you they ordered something healthy at the canteen does not mean they have. I do strongly recommend you keep an eye on their parent pay account. I know they're 18 and I know it's really their choice what to eat, but healthy food and staying healthy is very important. Please do support the students to have a sensible bedtime they stick to. I'm going to talk more about phones later, but we do all know very much the dangers of them going to bed at 10 o'clock, their lights out, we all think they're asleep, but actually they're on their phone till 2 or 3 in the morning. Same with video games. I would recommend, however much they might dislike you for it, having a system where if that is happening, either you check their phone, the Wi-Fi goes off, whatever it might be, such that they can't do that. Some students, not all, will have started partying. Some will be engaging in drinking alcohol or vaping or cigarettes, or some of them probably will have got involved with drugs. I'm realistic about this. If your child is that, please do talk to them about how it's during term time, it's really not sensible to do that during the week. We do find the students who use alcohol and like to go out partying often perform worse in their exams, particularly because they've just not taken in the materials they're taught in schools. Something we find works well is a little reward. For example, if a student's got a test to study for, if they do X, Y, and Z revision and they can show you that, could you let them choose a takeaway to have that evening? Something like that. I know I am mindful of the fact that not everyone can afford that. But if you can, just little rewards, or you can pick a chocolate bar of your choice from the supermarket, whatever it might be. And please do celebrate small successes with them, because that, however much they pretend to be too cool for that, that does really sit with them. Now, if you think your student is really drowning with their well-being, and firstly, I have parents crying to me every year about how they feel they're bad parents because their child is overwhelmed. You're not. It happens every year. You're amazing parents. So don't worry about that, and do feel free to cry to me. It happens all the time. So we have plenty of wellbeing support at school. Firstly, your first port of call should be your child's mentor. We have a counsellor. She always prioritises year 13 once we get to this sort of time of year. The students can refer themselves, but do talk to them about that. Our wellbeing queen, Miss Armitage, is amazing, and Mrs Davis is our academic mentor. She can help them specifically with revision stress. She also does have a master's in mental health support, so she can do wellbeing support as well. Then there's the rest of the sixth form team, myself, Mr Shepherd and Mrs Gossel. But also, if your child is really struggling with their mental health, please do encourage them to see their doctor. It is true that there are long waiting lists in the NHS to get mental health support, but it's better to get on that waiting list than not to be on it, because they will need that help at some point. And finally, I'm just going to leave this here in case anyone wants to take a photo. If you're worried your child is getting to an emergency level, and this is very extreme, I'm not saying this will happen, but just in case, here are some helplines. Kooth is the top one. Kooth is amazing. It's an online counselling service. The school subscribe to it. The students have all got a login, but they've probably forgotten they have a login, even though we do tell them quite a lot. If they just want someone to chat to, they don't want to see our school counsellor face to face, then Kooth is amazing. All the other ones are emergency helplines for lots of different things. So feel free to just take a quick photo of that. I'll leave it on the board for another 30 seconds in case you do. Fine, so that's a little talk about well-being. Now I'm going to give some study tips. So I know that a number of you want to help your child revise, but these are some of the study tips that we give the students so that you can talk to them. So firstly, it's really important they understand what exams they're going to be doing, but also what content they'll be doing in each exam. So different subjects all work differently. I can't tell you about every subject. Your child should know about the subjects they do, but if they look in their subject handbook or on the exam board website, they will be able to see specifically for their subject which content is in which exam. So quite often different exams cover different modules, so students can prioritise their revision depending on which module they are being examined on first. Secondly, textbooks are brilliant. Now, we don't really use textbooks in lessons very much at Finnan Park because our teachers write their own materials, but having textbooks at home or revision guides is a really, really good way of supporting your child. So if your child studies a subject where there is a textbook or a revision guide, I strongly recommend purchasing it. Some are available on Parent Pay so that the child can use it. I generally recommend that students read up about the lesson they're about to learn a little bit before the lesson so they have some basic knowledge. That means that during the lesson they can really focus on the finer points, on getting the higher level knowledge because they're already ahead with the basics. Now, my biggest tip, and this is my biggest tip for all the students, revise the tricky topics first, but don't forget the other topics. I'm a maths teacher and my maths class are absolutely notorious for revising the topics they like. And there's one or two topics they find very challenging. They don't revise those because it's too overwhelming for them. I really recommend that if the students have a couple of topics that are their nemesis topics, they are the first to go in the revision schedule. They're the first to be covered every day. And slowly over time, they'll stop being nemesis because those are the topics that will get left. And those are the topics that will result in the meltdowns when we get to April, May, June. Space out revision over time, it is there's so much research that it's really bad for children and for their mental health and also for their memory retention to cram one subject for hours. In education, we call it interleaving, but it's really important that they jump between subjects. So they might do 30 minutes of one subject, 30 minutes another. They might do an hour of one subject, an hour of another, whatever it is. But these 5 or 6 hour cramming sessions of one subject at the weekend when they've got a test doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And so please, please advise them against it, both from a wellbeing perspective, but also from a practical perspective. Also use the specification. Your child will have, they might have lost it, and if they have, they can get it off the website. Your child will have a copy of the specification for every single subject they do. I recommend going through it with them, get them to rate each line in the specification as red, amber, green. Green, if they can do it, they can sit the exam on it tomorrow. Red, if it's a really negative topic for them, and amber if they're in the middle. And then you've got your priority. You start with your red topics when you're revising, so when they're making their schedule, they put the red topics in first. The amber topics go in next. We don't forget the green topics, but they don't need to focus on them quite as much. And that will help them really organise their thoughts. Do be aware when they do that first, where if you sit with them and you go through the specification and get them to do red, amber, green, then at first there'll be a lot of red and that will seem overwhelming to them. That's fine. That's why we're doing it now. It's worth doing it again in a couple of weeks and they will be amazed at how much change can happen quickly when they're revising in a focused way. So some of you won't have heard of examiners' reports. Some of you will be very familiar with them, but this is what they are and they're amazing. After every exam series, the chief examiner for a paper writes a report about what students did well and what they did badly in that exam. The examiner's reports are probably the best tool there is in terms of if you've got a child who's on a grade C moving to a B, B to an A to an A star, just levelling up that little bit with their answers. So I recommend that students read the examiner's reports, they read them again, they make spider diagrams of key points, highlighting what the examiner thought was really, really important for that answer. If students have answered past papers, they can then go back to answers they've done, cross-reference with the examiner's report. Did they miss anything out? Add it in. And basically, do they tick all the points the examiners want them to? Did they get the point of the question in exactly the way the examiners wanted them to? Those reports are basically an insight into the mind of the examiner. And by reading them and using them as a really regular tool, that is the way that they can come out with the top marks in exams. I say to the students quite regularly, they should practice exam technique like they would train for a marathon. And I include things like the manual dexterity of writing for 3 hours. You wouldn't suddenly run a marathon if you had done no running. And therefore, if your child is doing essay subjects or they are doing math subjects where they're going to have to sit and do calculations for 2.5 hours, whatever it might be, they need to build that up. So let's take an essay subject. If they're going to have to write 3 essays over 3 hours, then they need to practice writing for 30 minutes at a time. They need to practice writing moving up to 45 minutes at a time, an hour at a time, to build up the stamina and to build up the brain power to be able to keep their thoughts flowing for that long. Students often don't think about how tricky the manual dexterity is and the brain power required to keep their focus for all that time. So do really encourage them over time in their schedule to build this up. This is why it's important to start practicing now, because now they've got months and months before they have to do their summer exams. Another thing that students often fall down on is they don't practice their own proofreading. Proofreading is very important in the exam. We know that students make silly mistakes. We know they miss things. Proofreading is a skill. If they have a mark scheme, tell them to cover it up with a piece of paper, read one line only, check that bit, read one line only, check that bit. Because what happens so often is students, particularly in mathsy, sciencey subjects, they look at the mark scheme, they're like, oh yeah, I could have done that. But they couldn't because they didn't. And then the first time they really do anything without looking at the mark scheme is the exam, the final exam, and then they have a bit of a meltdown. So that proofreading, doing things without mark schemes and then checking one line at a time is really important. Also, if a student has done a question, a week later, do it again, improve it, have a look at the mark scheme, have you done it better? That's a really good test of whether or not they are improving. I know this sounds like a lot, but these children only have 3 or 4 subjects. They have at least 10 hours in the week when they're not in lessons. And so actually there is a lot of time. It's just important they use that time effectively. Finally, in terms of study tips, there is quite a lot of evidence that one of the best ways we retain information, that's not just students, that's everybody, is by teaching it. So accept that you're going to be a pupil for a while and ask the students to teach their parents, carers, peers, siblings, friends, whoever else about the bits of the course they find most challenging. Those red categories, those things that scare them, get them to plan a lesson and teach you. And then next week, get them to teach you again. And finally, as I said, it is really important that students practice questions in exam conditions and in timed conditions. So those are my study tips. I will be sending this out, so don't panic if you miss them. I know that I'm saying a lot, and I will send out the recording as well. But when you're encouraging your child to study, often parents say to me, I just don't know if they're studying well or not. I don't know, how can I possibly know whether they're doing what they should do? If they are doing all the things I've just outlined, they're going to be fine. Right then, so finally, I'm going to talk about procrastination. And I'm going to link it to the use of mobile phones. I'll only be another couple of minutes. I know we're all busy. So firstly, procrastination will happen. That's just a fact. And the students will procrastinate, probably more than they should, as we all do when they're preparing for their exams. And I think it's really sensible as parents that the principle of procrastination is not something we make too negative, because it's going to happen anyway. So let's not make them beat themselves up about it. What is important is that they learn to limit it and they learn to plan it. What goes wrong is when a student has put aside 3 hours to do some really good study and they realise they did 10 minutes of study and they spent all of the rest of the time on video games or icing a cake, or even in some cases, they become great at housework. So rather than chunking their time in hours, 2 hours, 3 hours, I recommend, if you have a child who's a bit of a procrastinator, and we know there are plenty of those in year 13, set small goals. So 20 minutes, what are you going to do? And you can even support them. You can put a timer on for 20 minutes. You can take away their phone for 20 minutes. You can bring them a hot chocolate in 20 minutes and they can show you what they've done. Whatever it is that's going to work for them, chunking those things up in a really small way is important. It's very important that they have breaks, but it's also important that those breaks are short. We all know children, some of your children, not all of them, we all know children who will do that 20-minute work and then they'll treat themselves to a 2-hour break. That's not going to help. If they've worked for 20 minutes, a 2 or 3 minute break is all they need. They do need those breaks. They need to come away from their screen, go for a walk, get some fresh air, but it only needs to be for a couple of minutes. So support them to plan that time. Removing distractions is important. This goes back to them having a quiet space to study. Remember, they can use school. Remember, they can use Coventry and Warwickshire Library. But also distractions around the home. We recommend that if your child has lots of posters up or pictures up on the wall, there is some academic research that suggests that can be distracting. Maybe encourage them to take them down just for a short time while they're studying, or put a curtain over them or something, a plain curtain. In terms of productivity, there's some evidence that suggests that students tend to be more productive by doing a large task first and then crossing off a few smaller ones. We all know people, I'm one of those people, who add 3 or 4 tasks they've already done to their to-do list for the satisfaction of crossing them off. And if you do a large task you're scared of and then you treat yourself by doing a couple of smaller ones, that can feel really productive and it can spur students to be productive further on. I love the phrase "eat your frog." I can't remember which author it was that wrote about it, but what it means is do the worst task first. We've all been guilty. I do this all the time, of going to work on Monday and thinking I must do this, and by Friday afternoon I haven't done it, and it's a real problem. It's stressing me out. Someone's probably mad at me. I feel so much better if I do the worst task first, and so will your child. And so it's really important that they get in the habit of just getting that task done. They will feel so much better afterwards. Do support them and encourage them with that, because students often don't realise how important that is. And finally, and probably the most important thing, is mobile phone use. So there is very, very clear evidence that mobile phones, and particularly social media, is very damaging for concentration. There was a school that did an experiment. They got a group of 20 students last year to completely lock away all social media, including Snapchat, Instagram, all that sort of thing, for 3 months in advance of their exams, and all of those students achieved an average of 2 grades above their target grade in every subject. Now, that was at GCSE, not A level, but the point stands. It was a very, very, very clear correlation with success. Social media causes so many problems. You will know it causes social problems, it causes fallouts, it causes anxiety, it causes poor concentration, it distracts the students. There is nothing good about social media when it comes to the students preparing for their exams. Don't get me wrong, there is lots of good with social media. Children change the world using social media. Children keep themselves informed using social media. But specifically in terms of exam prep, there is nothing good. Now, you will know your relationship with your child, but I really recommend working with them. And if I were you, I'd try and do this with their consent rather than against their consent. But I really recommend locking them away, taking them off them, turning them off, whatever it might be. Your child does not need their phone to study. They need a device to study. We will lend them a laptop if they don't have one. So speak to me if you're telling me that's the barrier. I can help. But I would strongly recommend locking those phones away. You can buy, I've got one, it's really helpful. You can buy like lunchbox type Tupperwares that will have a timed lock. So you seal it, you set it for say half an hour and it won't open for half an hour, and then get them to put it away, because otherwise they'll see notifications popping up. And it's really important that they have time away from social media. This is probably the biggest thing that I can suggest in terms of success. Also, if they listen to music on their phone and that's their excuse for wanting it out, firstly, does it actually help them? In most cases, music is a distraction. Not all cases, some people it does really work for. You know your child, but do have that conversation with them, especially if it's music with words. Often students will start singing the words and not really focus on what they're doing. And finally, they can get music on another device if they want music. They can have like a CD player, they can have a laptop that plays music, they can use Spotify on a different device, whatever it might be. They don't need a phone for that. Now, mobile phone usage, there are loads of apps out there that limit mobile phone usage. The top one, Flora, I love it. Basically, you set it up when you stop using your phone, and over time it grows a tree. And if you stay off your phone for long enough, then it will grow a tree. There are loads of apps, Google it. But I really recommend working with your child, and you can give them rewards. Again, think about chocolate bars, takeaways, whatever it is that your child likes doing, going for a walk with you in the countryside. Doesn't have to be expensive to help them limit their mobile phone use. But I would say if there is one thing as head of sixth form that would make a big difference to our results, it is the amount the students are on their phones and the amount they want the immediate response to everything their friends send them, which means they almost never concentrate for long periods of time until they get to their exams. Suddenly they realise they don't know how to. So if you can, work with them on the mobile phone usage. Every year I have parents who make real enemies of their child over this, but probably if there is one hill to die on, this is it, in terms of both the academic research and my experience having run a sixth form for several years. A lot of the kids actually deep down are on board with it because they know that their mobile phones are no good for them. So I would start the conversation at home if you possibly feel you can. So that's my whistle-stop tour of ways to help your child. I really hope it was useful. Take it or leave it. Every child is different. Not every tip will work for every child, but those are some things that over my years as head of sixth form, I have noticed have been effective for the majority of children. If you have any quick questions, I will answer them now. Just pop them in the chat and I'll have a look. If you have any bigger questions, then just send me an email, or if you reminder, because this is being recorded, you will see the questions in the chat. So if you'd rather ask me privately, send me an email and I'll respond to you tomorrow. Thank you. I hope that was useful, and good night. I'm going to stay around for about 5 minutes to answer any question. Yes, the examiner's reports are all online. If you Google the subject and the exam board, and then, so if, for example, you say Edexcel Maths examiner's reports, they'll just all pop up. Right, then if there are any more questions, oh, here we go. How many hours a day after school should they revise? That really depends on how much they're doing in school. I would say it's good to get them in the habit at this stage of doing a couple of hours each day if they possibly can outside of school. That will probably increase as we get closer to the exams, but if they're doing an hour to 2 hours every day now, that is a good habit to be in. If there are any further questions, ask them now, because then I'm going to shut the meeting down in another 30 seconds or so. Cool, right, it doesn't seem like there are any more questions. I will send the recording out with my bulletin tomorrow, and I just hope that was useful. Have a nice evening, everybody.